Hello everyone. Welcome back to our video series on how to build a red team cyber range lab. This is actually a second part into joining to Active Directory domain forest. In our previous video, we did create a join between the fru.local and django.txt, and just wanted to do a quick recap on the authentication mechanism which we chose. And if you remember, we got to this point which we had to choose between forest wide and selective type of authentication, and I indicated that per the definition of each, the forest wide gives users on one domain access to on one forest access to resources in another forest. So in this case, we chose forest wide authentication for both fru.local and django.txt, and the expectation is that we will any user within the fru.local can have access to resources in django.txt. I also did explain that it is a little bit iffy when it comes to this definition because it's not maybe the way you might think. So let's do a quick demo to understand the implication of the type of authentication that we have chosen. So based on this, it means that we can have access to any resources within the this forest, which is the django.txt. So I went ahead and actually added a workstation to that machine, and I'm going to demo in the typical scenario what the forest wide authentication means. All right, so the assumption here is, from my previous video, is you have a physical access to a machine in the other forest, which is how the definition of forest wide authentication means. So I have a user whose name is Kwame Nkrumah, and that user is within the fru.local domain or forest, but not in the django.txt. But based on definition that we have here from the forest authentication, it means we can have any user, which includes Kwame Nkrumah, to be able to authenticate to the django.exe using the fru.local credentials. So if we do this and we try to log in with Kwame Nkrumah's credential, as you can see, that gives us access to a machine which is actually within a different forest, and that is because we had chosen this option, which is the forest-wide authentication. Now, in a typical red teaming or penetration test engagement, we may not have this luxury to have access to a physical box in a different forest to be able to authenticate into it, and that is all this definition means. So if we go, and let me see if I can bring up alright, so if we check host name, okay, and if we do ipconfig all, it will tell you that we are connected to this external host using a user, which is Kwame Nkrumah from another domain here. If you can look, it's fru, right? But what if we don't have access to a physical box to authenticate with a forest with a foreign user? This is where the tricky part comes in. So for instance, let's do the same thing from, let's say we are connected on a foreign on the fru.local, and we want to do remote desk connection to the same box which Kwame Nkrumah has access to. And before this demo, I did enable remote desktop on this machine, which is not enabled by default on Windows 10. All right, so just for this demo. So if I go here, if we try to it pops up and we set it to and as you can see, we have been denied access. Okay, so this is what I mean by that, is even though this definition tells us that you have access to specific resources in the forest, it isn't the way we may think that you have a complete access. You have limited access based on the physical access to the box. Again, within our red teaming, that would not be something that we may have luxury to. Let's demo another thing. Let's assume that we want to actually access that the same machine by mapping it. Okay, let's try to access the C share. Okay, we get access denied as well. Okay, now the reason why, from what I can tell, is of course before you can access the C share or the admin share, you need to have administrative privilege on that. Okay, so let's try to actually use the administrator from this domain. And as you can see, that administrator is also denied access, right? So that goes to tell you that the definition of the forest wide has its limitations, and it doesn't necessarily mean one resource from one domain or forest has complete access to resources in another domain if we choose the forest wide authentication method. So on a red team engagement and on a typical trust attack strategy, or a way to go through how to hop from one trust to another, you typically want to first of all map out any trust between the one that we have compromised. In this case, let's assume we have breached the afro.local, and we want to find out what other trust this machine or this domain or this forest has with other forests, right? And then once we have identified any trust, we are also going to enumerate any users or groups in the afro.local domain that may either have access to any resources in the external forest, which in this case, let's say we identify jungle.txt, or if there are any groups or users that have access or some sort of relationship between this afro.local and jungle. And then once we have identified that user or the groups, then we'll try to compromise any accounts that belongs to that particular group, and then use that to escalate our privilege and then gain access to the external trust, right? So to do a quick demo before we actually build that weakness within our lab, we can use Power View tool. For those of you who don't know where to get it, you can go to GitHub and you can find it within PowerSploit, and there are some few commands within Power View that we can use to identify any trust. So first of all, we can map up the trust, and once we have it up here, we need to load it up, right? So when we click on run, and you may have this telling you that you've been blocked if you're running this on one of the most newest versions of Microsoft operating systems, which in this case is Windows Server 2016. So with administrative privilege, we can actually turn off or disable antivirus. Okay, that should be it, and then we can run it again, and then this time this works. So let's create a screen, and if we do get get domain trust. Come on. Okay, we can map the trust. And of course, so it's going to tell us here that there is a trust between the afro.local and dango.txt, right? So it's going to map up all the trusts from this domain. So we have one between the alpha.local and gh.alpha.local, and then we have one between alpha.local and then django.txt. All right, so at least, so we have completed the first part of our post exploitation, which is enumerating any trust. Now that we have identified trust, now we are going to enumerate any foreign user. Now what that means is basically any user within the alpha.local that may have access, basically what we call the outgoing access to the django.txt, right? And the command from Power View would be domain foreign user. Okay, and then we have to specify the django.txt, and as you can see, there's nothing. We can also identify any any group. Yeah, and then txt, and there's none here. All right, the objective for the next steps is for us to create a group that, or a user that would have access to the django.txt to replicate or to simulate what we have found in a real world engagement. All right, so let's go through a process of creating, first of all, a group. All right, so let's go to tools, AD users and groups. We'll right click users, we go to new, and then group, and you can name any group any name you want. So in this case, let's assume there is a group within the alpha.local forest called a research group, right? And we are going to, the group scope is going to be universal, and we'll just click OK. So now we have this group. We can double click on that. If we go under the members, there is no member here. So let's add a member to this group, and we will add Nkrumah to that group. Nkrumah will be in that group, and then we'll click apply. So once we have created the research group from within the alpha.local forest, the next goal is to add that group to a specific group, or give that group a privilege or permission within the django.exe forest, so that there could be a proper authentication from the alpha.local forest into the django.exe forest. What I mean by proper authentication is if we provide the permission, it will be able to grant them a command line or remote code execution, or a remote connection using a tool or a means such as PowerShell, PS remoting or invoke command from the forest environment from the alpha.local forest to the django.txt forest, right? So let us proceed to add that group. Go to AD users and computers. We will double click on where we already have this up. We have several users or groups here. You can choose whichever has, depending on the objective we want to accomplish. For most part, we are going to add that group to administrative or administrators group, right? All right, so we will double click on that, and then we'll select administrators, and we'll go into the members. If you look, these are the members within the django.exe that have, or that belong to, administrators group, right? So we are going to add our foreign group in here, and if you see, the selection is going to the default. Of course, it's going to be this current one, which is Django.txt. That is not what we want. We want to actually import our group from external domain, which is the afro.local, and we can click on advanced and then click on find, and we are going to look for our research group, or whichever name that you created for your own, and then we'll click OK, and then we'll click apply, and then we'll click OK, and then we'll click OK, and then exit out. Okay, so let's test and see if this user can now be discovered from this domain. All right, so let's do this now. As you can see, we have now created a path or a trust mesh between the afro.local and Django.txt. Now what that means is, in a typical red team engagement or in any attack simulation, once we have compromised the afro.local forest, we are going to look for a link between that forest and an external forest. In this case, it can be a user or it can be a group, and within that group will be a bunch of users who would have the privilege or permission to gain access to the external forest. So in this case, we have created that path between this and the other one, and if you can see, the member domain is Django.exe. The group name is administrators, and this is the group distinguished name. The key important things here is then you ask yourself, well, how do I find out who are the users within this group that I can, compromise? Because remember, when I was giving out the attack strategy, I told you that we need to find out, map out the trust, and then once we have mapped out the trust, we need to enumerate users or group that would have permission in the external or the other forest. And then once we have identified that group or the user, now we are going to look to compromise that user and then use that user's credential to jump over into the external domain. This doesn't look pretty because we still don't know which members belong to this user. The important thing what we can do here is the member name here, but if you see, it's a SID number, which is easy for us to reverse or for us to convert that number. So the next task is we can copy the SID number, and then within Power View there's a command called convert SID to name, and then we can paste it here. And that is going to give us this group. And of course, then we are going to have to find out who belongs to that group. Again, I'm showing you how real red teaming is, the steps you have to go through to do more digging and more enumeration. It's not easy. So we can do net group and then research domain, and then that is going to give us the members. Now we know that K Nkrumah is a member of the research group, and the research group has membership or have permission or belong to the administrators group within the Django.exe. So if we can compromise Nkrumah's credential, now we can have access to some boxes depending again on the privileges that Nkrumah has, which from looking at the group distinguished name, we know that that group belongs to administrators. That means it may give us access to other boxes, right? So how do we confirm it? Let's do a quick demo of a confirmation using PS remoting. So we already know the SDC01 machine, so we can type enter PS session, and then we can provide a computer's name, which is going to be SDC01.django.exe, and then we have to provide Nkrumah's credential, which the assumption is we have that in our possession, because once we have compromised the primary domain controller of this forest, we most likely must have dumped all the NTDS database and probably cracked the password hashes, or we can pass a hash if we have other tools such as PSExec or some other tools, right? So let's provide Nkrumah, okay, UMA, and then provide Nkrumah's credential, and then we have been able to authenticate to this box as Nkrumah. If we type who am I, Nkrumah, first name, and it's SDC01. So this is usually some of the attack strategy that we usually use when we perform red teaming engagement. After we have compromised one forest, how can you hop into another forest, right? Now, as an add-on bonus, let us do one more thing before we wrap up. So if we did this against the domain controller using Nkrumah, what if we use this admin so that you can understand what I was explaining about the forest wide and this selective authentication? So this is the Afro administrator, and then if we click that, we'll try to authenticate as that user. Would that be possible? No, we get access denied. So again, for the purpose of our demo, this seems to be a very good configuration setup for us to replicate how do we abuse trust between two forests. If we do the same thing against the workstation SWKS, okay, we are going to get an error, and the reason why we are going to receive that error is because PS remoting by default is not enabled on all Windows machines. In this case, the reason why we're able to get access to the SDC01 is it's a server and it's a domain controller, so by default that was enabled. But when it comes to workstations, we have to enable that for us to be able to do PS remoting. So we can accomplish that in 3 steps using group policy. Okay, so let's enable that quickly, and let's enable that against the Django.local. Okay, so first step is we are going to enable WinRM service. So we go to group policy, right click on the default domain policy, click edit, and we are going to select policies. Let me expand this real quick. We are going to select administrative templates, and we are going to select Windows components, and we will select Windows remote management. So we go all the way down. Here it is, and we'll select the WinRM service, and we see that we have allow remote service management through WinRM. It's not enabled, so we'll double click on it, and then we'll click enable. The options, we are going to use asterisk for IPv4 and IPv6, so we'll click OK, and that will enable it. The next step is we are going to set the WS management service to automatically start at startup. Okay, so let's kill all these so we don't expand it, and then we'll go to Windows settings. We'll go to security settings, and then system services. All right, and let me expand this, and we are going to go all the way down to Windows remote management. This one right here, we'll double click on it, and we are going to click on define this policy setting, and we're going to select the first option, automatic, and then hit apply and hit OK. the third option, the third step is to allow Windows remote management in the firewall. Okay, so we will do it right here within the settings. So within security settings, select Windows firewall with advanced settings. Okay, and then the inbound rule, we will right click and select new rule. So we will select the predefined option and then go all the way down, and we will select Windows remote management, this one right here. Click next, and finish. So now the PowerShell, the firewall setting has been done, completed. So let's close out and let us update the group policy, and possibly we may have to restart the workstation for the group policy to actually take effect. So we type gp update and let us restart this box. Okay, so we have restarted the workstation as WKS01. Let's go back to the foo.local forest and then try to ps exec or ps remoting against this box and see if that would actually have the remoting enabled. We are not really looking for successful authentication. We're just looking to make sure that WinRM has been enabled on this box. Okay, good. So as you can see, the user access denied. Again, going back to the authentication scheme, but we got a different error, and this wasn't regarding the WinRM not enabled, but this is actually against access control being denied because that user doesn't belong to the admin on this machine. Okay, so I think that actually concludes the second piece of joining to Forest. I think we have discussed several concepts which will be very, very beneficial in the future once we are done with the lab, and then we'll begin to put some of the concepts, attack techniques, concepts into consideration and begin to exploit those. So once again, thank you for your time, and if there's any specific concept which didn't make sense or you have a different way of explaining, by all means feel free to leave your comment. I would also encourage you to practice on the different kinds of authentication between the forest wide and the selective, and let's see if you come across anything better, anything that you think is unique that all of us should be aware of. Feel free to leave it in the comment section so we can all learn from each other. Thank you once again. You have a nice day. Bye bye.